Hope you're okay. We're going to be together for about the next hour to explore some aspects of the future. Not all of it, as you would imagine that might take rather longer than an hour. And I'd like to sort of leave you with an impression of the volume of change and the opportunities that those changes bring. So I guess there's often two ways you can view change. One is that it's a threat and it's discordant and uncomfortable and it means danger to your organisation, or it is the lifeblood of new thinking, new creativity and new opportunities. And I thought prefer that you would end up in that quarter, but it's entirely up to you how you respond, of course. So let's have a think about it. I too like to peer into the past to think about the future, and one of the things we might comment here on is that if you were to get your expert into the venture capitalist company to evaluate your new idea, then on this occasion we wouldn't have had X-rays, heavier than air flying machines, or radio, and we would have been the worse off for it. So I suppose the moral, at least for me, I think, is the story that have many, many advisors when you're thinking about areas of the future that don't actually exist yet, and we've yet to invent them and they've yet to become real. You need a wide angle of views and opinions to form your own judgment. So that's the first point. At this point, it's probably worth mentioning why we showed you that film at the beginning. That was produced by my company, and it looked at the future of biometrics and technology and financial services, and how we'd interact with technology, and we made it 12 years ago. So we didn't know about laptops really then, we didn't know much about, we knew nothing about tablets, we knew nothing about smartphones, we knew nothing about biometrics, but yet if you peer into the future you can get a reasonable vision of what's coming, and we produced that in 2000. So that's the purpose of that, is we can reflect back on some of our thinking. We haven't networked brains together, but I can assure you that in the military circles that already we'll be able to do very similar sort of things in memory implanting and these sorts of experiments, so that troops can fall into a terrain with some knowledge of their area without actually having learned anything. So there are some very interesting areas that's coming to pass. So where were we? Looking at the past, thinking about the future. So we did invent heavier than air flying machines, which is quite useful for getting on a plane. And at the point that this aeroplane was created, it was a 10-seater, and the engineer at Boeing said there will never be a larger aircraft than this. And there we have the 900-seat Emirates Airlines A380 Airbus. So again, looking at this, the issue is that when we can't envisage a future, when it turns up we sort of accept it, but because we work in projects, we tend to see that as the end. We have invented flying machines and this is it. So that's the end of the project, we can all relax and get on. But actually very often there's continuity that we go on and on and on and on changing. Whether it's smartphones, handphones, technology itself, whether it's people and behaviours, whether it's business models, whether it's areas of the world that are developing, whether it's flows of capital, whether it's regulatory compliance, those things keep moving on and on. There is no end to change. Right, so if we don't like change, we're doomed. We might as well get used to it. We are going to have a lot of change. Our parents, our grandparents had their transformational change, and we're having ours, and we've just got to live through our bit and embrace it as we choose. Okay, finally, tomato ketchup. Let's talk about, you're all riveted with that. Let's talk about tomato ketchup for a minute. Okay, Heinz is one of my clients, they're delightful people. What was fundamentally wrong with this bottle, this delivery vehicle? Oh, that's a real question, by the way, you get that occasionally.
Couldn't get from ketchup, I think.
Yeah, it didn't work. Right, so you put it at home, if you're old enough to remember, or even now with those bottles, you stood it on its lid, you balanced it somewhere, you propped it up by things that had a rounded lid, yeah? So it always fell over, no matter what you opened, it fell over, or fell out the cupboard. Well, eventually they got the hang of that, and of course put a big fat lid on it. And if you look at the innovation carefully, the biggest innovation probably is not just the fat lid, they've turned the label over. So now you're encouraged to turn it on its lid and put it in the cupboard, that way up, so it's ready to dispense. Okay, it's plastic as well, to be fair. But they launched the first one in 1872, and 130 years later fixed the problem. So the point is that when we look at our own organisations, it isn't about picking fun at Heinz. If we look at our own organisations, we are doing as many barking mad things as that. People have stopped telling us that our invoicing or our staff acquisition or our recruitment process or our customer interaction is hopeless, and they just put up with it. They do the equivalent of standing the bottle on its head, and I just give it up telling you. So sometimes get some fresh eyes in on what you do and how you do it, even if you're not hearing it's a problem, because you'll suddenly discover that you've got your own tomato ketchup bottles in your own company. So, during the recession we learned to survive. The good news is we learned to survive. That's good. And you go on learning to survive during downturns and depressed markets, and you have to do the things you have to do to keep and remain in business. But of course, at some point, then you see the future emerging. Of course, the whole world hasn't been in recession, far from it. Some markets like Australia have barely seen any glitch in their economic activity. But eventually we move towards innovation and creativity and new business models and new distribution channels and new partners using new technologies and approaching new markets. So hopefully you are all doing that and have been doing that for at least the last 2 years to imagine what the future might be for your organisation as money starts flowing again and people gain confidence. Because if you're not doing it, I can assure you, in every market that I work with, and I work with many diverse markets, there is innovation galore going on. And even the insurance industry is innovating, so they tell me. So, when we start seeing the flows of capital again, the flows of money, the consumer spend, the confidence emerge, you will see a whole load of new business models, new propositions, new transactions, and if you haven't changed, you may look a little dated. So, your choice. The other thing is, who do we ask to help us develop? One of the innovation gurus, you might say, was Steve Jobs. You could have asked Akio Morita from Sony as well. But it's not about asking your customers, because they'll always tell you they want a quicker, better, cheaper version of what you've already got. Then someone will bring out a new innovative product or service line, and they'll go and buy from them. And you will have increasing customer satisfaction and lose market share. So innovation is the innovative paradigm, as it's called, is often the owner of innovation will seek huge numbers of sources of insight and make their own mind up what is the outcome, the product, the service delivery that can be born on the back of that insight and produce its own products and services and wait for the market to be ready. And that's an awful lot of product and service line companies are taking this approach. So if you think about that, Digitus here comments about the fact we need many, many lines of inquiry in terms of insights. And here's some of the trends. There's a whole range of them. There's hundreds and hundreds and pages of trends of different areas of our lives, whether they're societal, whether it's technological, whether they're the other areas I mentioned earlier. They're all happening whether you're looking at them or not. So if they're in sharp focus because they matter to you, that's fine. If they're not in sharp focus, at least understand if they matter or not and make a conscious decision that they are irrelevant to your business plan, or they inform your strategy in a way that leads you to adjust your vision or adjust your strategy. So, trends. We'll talk about a few in a minute, but number one about recessions, they're incredibly creative times. Every one of these companies were either born or took in a huge inflection of growth during past panics, depressions and recessions. And if you look at P&G, 1837, they were formed in that panic, as it was called then. 1873, Edison put his companies together and GE was formed for the first time. And then you get to Burger King in 1954, and then 3 years later we had another recession, 1957, and the Whopper was launched. And what have they done since? Nothing. Brilliant move, understood the market, 11,000 restaurants open, leveraging that one idea. So the point is, we don't need thousands of innovative products and services in the market, but we need to go through a process of understanding what is really going to be appropriate for our new circumstances that we can really leverage and take off. So we don't need 100 new products, but we do need to have innovative insight into what's changing so that we can focus on what new offerings we can deliver. So we need some trends. So we're going to talk about trends and possibly discontinuities to flavour our thinking in the future. These are the key 6 drivers of change that we would often group some of the biggest issues under. Globalisation, obviously we've been experiencing that for quite a long time anyway. Of course, technology and consumption, new consumption and behaviour, work and energy and resources. And we're going to cover some of that tonight. Not all of it, but some of it. So, let's think about New World Order. This is a profile and a graph of the population of planet Earth. So, on this side, you've got about 2 to 5 million years ago, and over here, you've got what's happening now, and that's why it started in 1955. So in 1955, we stopped dying, which is good news for us, but it means we've changed the profile of the planet completely, and completely altered the future of how the economy is going to work around the world. And that's what's driving all of the change that we're seeing, apart from deregulation and the flows of capital and a whole lot of other things, but this is the principal driver that's driving economic change around the world. If you put that into some other relief, this green bit is the developed economies of the world, and the purple bit is everybody else who's being born and staying alive. So you can see that the relevance of the established world in terms of economic capacity from a human resource standpoint is massively being undermined by the capacity elsewhere. And with education levels rising, and capital levels rising, and personal consumption levels rising, which they are around the world, we can see we're only about 7 billion here, and we're going to top out around about 9.2 by 2050 or thereabouts, and top out ultimately about 10 billion people. And in 1955 we were 3 billion people. So we've already doubled and a bit more to get to where we are today. And we're going to add 3 more billion people to the planet simply in the next 4 decades. And it took 2 to 5 million years to get there in the first place. So the rate of change because of all of that activity is massively multiplied because of where those people are and what they're doing and how they're generating consumption and generating new business propositions. So where does that take us to? Here's one small example, the halal market. If you're involved in that at all, you'll know it's about being Quranic compliant. And many products and services are emerging with new business standards, new market standards, whether it's shipping, whether it's sports, whether it's IT portals, whether it's technology itself, whether it's cosmetics, which is an oxymoron if you know the Muslim culture. Cosmetics are not supposed to be at the forefront, but there is a standard, a halal standard for cosmetics. Pharmaceuticals has just been launched. These standards allow markets to grow rapidly. And it's been driven by capital, not by consumption. So people with money are now saying, I want my money flows to align with my values and beliefs, and that's where I'm going to put my money in the future. And that's spawned an enormous hotel industry in some parts of the world. And go forward another 40 years, and a third of the world's population will be born and live in Muslim countries. So we're seeing a dramatic change in the belief systems that drive behaviour and attitude to investment and also to consumption. So let's think about the population a bit more. I will get off this subject eventually, don't worry. I'll get into some other stuff as well. Business models we'll cover technology itself, and we'll cover a few other things. But it's worthwhile just thinking about where we've come from to have some sort of understanding of where we're likely to go. This is a chart some of you may have seen. It's Gapminder, terrific resource. These orange dots are the countries of Europe. This is income per capita, and this is life expectancy. This red one's China, this light blue one's India. And what I want to do is roll that forward for you, the dark blue of Africa. And so you can see actually how as increasingly we earn more money and we live in safer environments, we are living longer. And here's China catching up very rapidly along with India. We're now to 2000. This of course is the United States, 2010. So we're now coalescing around about 82, 83 in a lot of developed economies, and we're all moving roughly in the same direction. And if you look at that in slightly more detail, this was the UK, this is the First World War dip, this is the Second World War, and when the pension system was invented post-1945, average life expectancy was just under 65. What was the retirement age set in 1946? 60 for women, 65 for men. Yeah, i.e. you weren't supposed to get anything. And there was a meeting at the IIU this afternoon where the government was talking about how they're addressing the issues that you're not supposed to get anything. So how can we address the issue that now people think they can get 20 or 30 years worth of free living off the state, because that's what you're entitled to, because the government made a promise, and increasingly got to back away from that. So at least you can see, actually today it should be about 82, the retirement age. Now, if the French try and implement that, the periphery will be closed for about 3 years. Now, this is a huge issue. The European Commission believes it should be around 72, the UK believes it should be around 72. No one wants to talk about it because you don't win many votes, telling people they've got to keep working until they die, because you're supposed to keep working until you die. The idea was that when you cannot work any longer at all and support yourself, the state will step in and help you with a pension. So, of course, we backed away from retirement age, we're going to back away from this. The good news, if you're a baby boomer, born between 46 and 64, the government are likely to keep a promise they made to you to give you some pension. Not that it will matter to most people in business, but if you're not in that group, you're going to have to fund the baby boomers, the older people, and yourself. So bad luck, if you're under 50, you're doomed on this one. So there we are, look after yourself and leave quickly. So there we are, these models are often born on environments that don't exist any longer, and we've moved well beyond them, and we didn't address them as we went along. So thinking about life expectancy, Cass did a study recently and came up with the idea that men who are currently supposed to expire at 76 on average throughout life are now going to last until at least 91, if you're born around 85 or thereabouts, or 97, which means there's a huge gap in the amount of funding that's required. It's £160,000 a person. The government are adrift in terms of funding provision for L97. There's a huge amount of time we need to focus on for funding or work. Or maybe the retirement age, not that we have one anymore, officially should be 91. Now how good are we going to get to persuade people to move from 67 to 91? That might be a little bit of a problem. So the other thing, of course, is people look at this slightly more avant-garde, and some of the futurist community, they're saying, look, reasonably, if you live in a healthy, wealthy environment and you've got funding for good access to medicine, you should probably live to around about 120 now. So looking out there, you guys should live, given who you are and where you are, and probably what you're doing. I don't think you're extreme sports or the rest of it, but you probably should live to about 120. That's not extreme, is it? You've probably got aunts and uncles or grandmothers or mothers who've lived to 100, 90 or 97, so it's not a stretch to get to 120. So hopefully you're planning for that at least in your systems. I'm sure you are. The alternative is, of course, you work to 120. Or you fund some additional years in some fashion. So, some issues. If you go a little bit further, think, what's the implication? We've got a rapidly aging society, many more people, half of Europe is going to be over 50 in the next decade, so that's an enormous market of people who increasingly eyesight starts to go, doesn't it? Glasses need to come in, all the other things that are associated with aging. Well, you look at this shaver over here, there's a little tiny logo there that nobody over the age of 50 has seen for a decade probably. So the point is that we often need to adapt our products and service offerings to an older cohort and not perhaps do the grey 6-point text on white background brochure or website. Because the people with the money, by the way, 80% of the wealth is owned by the over 50s, the people with the money can't see it. So if you're telling the people with the money, you're not welcome on my website, you're not welcome as a customer, because you can't read my brochure, the 20-year-old designer said it was very attractive, and actually you're putting out a very strong message that you're not welcome in my company. And if you've got, there's a large print version for blind people or anybody over 50, then you're telling people that you're a bit abnormal and you need help. So we need to adjust the way we've done things. It was a youthful economy a few years ago, 60s and 70s, we're not a youthful economy now. We needed to change the paradigm, change the model, change the typeface and the font. Yeah? It's simple sometimes. The other thing, of course, is you need to put seats around the place. If you sit down in the bank, someone sells to you. And actually, people are just tired. So, big changes. A lot of people need to work longer because they have to, they haven't got the money, and some people choose to, and the greatest gift for somebody over 60 or 70 or 80 who wants to work is to give them paid employment. Because it's the greatest way of giving somebody a sense of value. Paid employment, not working for free. So there are systems in place that we need to start employing the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90-year-olds, and maybe the 100-year-olds as well in our businesses. And of course they won't go on a paintballing, bonding mission because your insurers won't cover you. So we just need to think very differently about how we engage with older people. Also, you've got the fact that the big, zappy, exciting new breakthrough technologies have been built in the past by the 19 and 23-year-olds, but actually all the evidence is now telling us that the over 55s, the entrepreneurial group now in the United States and in the UK, are outlasting the younger ones in startups. So we're now getting this sort of silverpreneur phenomena, where injected by their corporates or choosing to leave corporate world or start their own businesses, these companies over 55 are much more sustainable than those under 50 who are losing their businesses and crashing and burning earlier and quicker. So it's a good thing if you're getting older. Finally, Aubrey de Grey. Who knows the work of Aubrey de Grey? Anybody study him? Very interesting man. Looks bizarre, doesn't he? But there you are. He's a very interesting guy. He's a leading gerontologist based at Cambridge. And he talks about the fact that aging is curable. And that ultimately, of course, that we should be able to live to roughly 500 or 1,000 years of age. Yeah? And believe strongly that the first person to get to 1,000 is probably already 60. Well, hands up those people who believe that. No. Okay, so we're all the Boeing engineers that say we can't see that there is going to be a future beyond that. Because remember I showed you a chart of how we went from 40-year-olds to 60-year-olds to 83-year-olds. We're already on the journey. The plane is flying. We've built the first aircraft. And we've got a lot of bioscience and personal medicines and nanotechnology and a whole bunch of things that are happening. And of course nutrition only happened during the Second World War as a science. All of that is yet to play through in terms of life extension. So I'm not suggesting to you for a minute you'll live to 1,000, far be it from me to do that, but look him up on TED and you'll be amazed at the logic of some of the science. And maybe we're a bit cynical. So we'll be cynical for a moment. Let's say you only live to 200. Okay, just 200. What are you going to do now? Now, when that becomes common currency, that the current historic view of life expectancy isn't a valid predictor of the future, and you can ask the actuarial people this, because I spoke at their conference in the United States for the long-term care industry only 2 weeks ago in Las Vegas, of all dark places. But those actuaries there are talking about exactly this issue. But they're constrained very much by law and tables on how they can approach the predictions of life expectancy and factor that into various products. So, really interesting world we're entering into. It's got nothing to do with the past, it's all to do with a very different future. Or we get fat and die young. So I'm sorry about that, that's the other alternative. In one trend in one direction, very often there's something going to push us in another direction, and the haves and have-nots may be quite distinct by certain characteristics. Here's an ambulance delivered to North Wales, and the stretcher will take a 28-stone person, and it's got a crane on the back to get them in. So I was talking about adapting our world, but this is what we're having to adapt our world for. And probably slightly more worrying if you're into marketing, is this is the transit system in the United States, and this is the fat person seat. And you've got normal, fat person sit here. You know, this is the equivalent of doing the small text for people with the money. You know, don't do that. Don't make it a different colour, don't make it stand out. You know, make all the seats bigger or make it a bench seat. You know, if we want people to be attracted to us, we've got to think about how we respond to things. And of course, aging societies are pretty much nothing to do with living longer, although we are going to live longer. It's about the fact we didn't have the kids. So we've got a pyramid here that should be roughly this shape. This is women and men. This is the cohorts by age, the population of the United Kingdom. And this group of people are missing. We decided to go to work, improve our lifestyle, and have less children. And we were told by our governments to do that and save the planet by not having more children. So we did that, and it's now left us in a rather interesting and perilous state in terms of the shape of our population and how our welfare systems and care systems work. And we've got to think that through. Now, that was 2000. If you go through to 2025, now the shape of people missing is that shape. So we've got that many people missing. And we know they're missing because we didn't give birth to them. And we knew that a long time ago. So what's quite interesting is actually we've taken a long time to respond to the fact we've got to change all of our systems that are in place in the United Kingdom to manage our welfare and care for elderly people and put in place the resources and capability to operate our country at that national level. So let's move on from that for a moment. I've done people for the minute, they might crop up again in a minute, but pretty much that's sort of some of the stuff that's going on with people. The economy is going to treble in size over the next 4 decades. The current world economy is roughly $63 trillion US, and it's going to triple to around $190 trillion US in the next 40 years. So if you are in any way able to tap into that growth, which is mostly not in the United Kingdom, as you would know, and it's elsewhere, and we've known that for some time, trebling of that growth gives you huge potential. As you know, in fast growth environments, there isn't time to have a competitive battle that we're used to for the acquisition of anything. You know, in saturated, oversupply markets like ours in Europe, highly regulated as well, to win any new business, you're usually competing with a number of people who you probably recognise and compete with all the time. In fast-moving markets, that isn't the case. If you've got a good proposition, you'll very often be taken up without the pain of competition. The Standard Chartered Bank were talking about doubling economic activity in 2 decades. So that's $63 trillion of new activity to go and shake a stick at. And some people say that if you want to be in business, get in the way of the money. Well, that's where the money is. It's all out there. It's all growing fast. It's going to new hands. People have never had it before. It's highly diverse, but it's available for you to go and interact with. And it took us a couple of 100 years of economic activity, as we would know it now, to get $63 trillion, and we're going to do that in 20 years. Huge opportunity. Budget should be 200% and 300%, not 20 or 30, which would be exciting for those that can get out there. The other thing about that is, of course, we're changing the shape of the way the world works. And increasingly you'll have noticed that the communiques after world summits are very often now not staffed at the podium by the traditional established leaders of the old world. The emerging 7 countries, which have now, instead of Judeo-Christian, but primarily these countries are now very many more belief and value systems in those countries. They're roughly going to overtake in terms of economic terms by 2019, and by 2050 they will be double the economic activity of the G7. So in population terms, we're being massively outrun. by people growing up elsewhere, and we need to embrace them and work with them and see them as contributors to our economy, our firm and our well-being, and also our markets that we can address, but also from an economic standpoint, equally those countries are moving very fast and will have an awful lot more say on where the economic centre of gravity is in the future, and the very, very near future of that, quite frankly. So, that's a little bit about that. But what does that mean in terms of sort of middle class, if I use that rather pejorative phrase, but sort of definition about it? Consumer spend. If you look at Asian countries right now, we're talking about 20% of total worldwide consumer spend. By 2020 or thereabouts, it's up to 40, and over 60% by 2030. So you can see that as a percentage of consumer spend for insurance and motor vehicles and all the other things that go along with a sort of middle-class lifestyle, you can see that the centre of gravity is rapidly moving. And one of the things we're clear about, of course, is that we have very different cultures and value systems and beliefs and sizes in different parts of the world. You may find that primary launch markets are no longer the United States, UK and Europe, but they're in various parts of the fast-growth emerging world, or developing world. Very different scenario from the past. If we use the past to predict how models of products and service offerings will go, we'll be blindsided by the huge changes going on. So let's think about the EU for a minute. It's not very good right now, as you possibly know. This is roughly where we are right now, with a predicted dip in the economic activity, and roughly rising to about 2015, where we're forecasting the next best business year. And certainly that's true for the UK, and we've got a couple of years now before we get up to full strength, and we'll feel we've had a good business year. If you think about where that growth is coming from, of course we all know it. It's coming from SMEs, and even the European Commission has recently launched the Small Business Act, which requires that regulators actually consider the impact on small businesses, particularly the micro businesses, the less than 10 people, where there's massive uptake of new employment, and are looking to reduce the burden of regulation on this group. And we've just done a study looking at 10 countries across Europe on what the governments are doing to exactly remove that. And some of that, believe it or not, is actually quite innovative and deserves credit. Not always necessarily yet coming through, impacting everybody day to day, but some countries are moving ahead incredibly rapidly, rethinking how they structure government, how big or small government is, and what its role is, and how to measure impact of regulation on small businesses in the future. It's worth getting alongside some of the folk in the Cabinet Office who are doing that work. So, that's that. Put on our economy. Okay, here we are. The red line is the loss of economic activity during the Great Depression. And this black line with the triangles on it, that's the current Great Recession. We're back up there now, of course. So this is telling us we've lost just about the same economic activity as the Great Depression. And the one thing we know about that is that, well, from the fact that finance-led crashes tend to be about 7 years to get back to full recovery, number one. But number two is that with that depth of change of economic circumstances, there will be huge change. Because I remember I told you about those new companies that were formed, new products that were formed. With that depth of recession and depression, there will be huge changes in most of your markets as we emerge from a sense of depression and recession, which of course we've emerged somewhat now technically, but of course we don't have that same spirit yet of growth and abundance. So interesting times ahead, exciting times hopefully, many of you will think. So changing communities, how have our communities changed? Well, number one, there'll be more people in the UK. Even the Office of National Statistics is still comfortable to predict that we're going to add 10 million more people to our country over the next few years. And about 60 million people thereabouts will be urban, which is currently the whole population of the United Kingdom. So increasingly, city life and city centricity and how we live those lives in cities are going to be on the agenda. And of course, we need to live lives in cities more economically efficiently than we have in the past. And technology and smart city technologies in particular, transport and ownership is going to have a huge impact over the next few years. Families themselves are getting smaller and housing units are getting smaller as people choose lifestyles of being alone more and more. And part of that's driven by the fact it costs an awful lot to bring up a child, and that's without factoring in private education, if that's your choice to do as well. So, a lot of change going on around us. Women are going to take over the world. They've been telling us anyway. There's plenty of evidence to say they're outperforming men, mostly around the world, in most education systems where they're given free access. And women now control significant percentages of household budgets and private wealth. And if you ask, women will be also increasingly 53% of UK's millionaires. So there's been a massive change. We asked Coots, 40% of their customers are self-made millionaire women. So there's been a huge change again. It isn't represented necessarily yet in business.